As a kid, I always loved to draw, but I didn't consider it play. No, the play happened with the action figures, with the Legos, with the Lincoln Logs, where I could build up a setting for these characters and create a story for them, piece them all together with my imagination. And the great thing about this was that I could do it inside or outside, alone or with my friends. You could call up your buddies who'd bring their own personality to the toys that you had and get together and create this imaginary story together. It was as easy as picking up your phone and saying, "Hey Gabe, I got the best Buzz Lightyear action figures in town. Come over to my place, we'll have a great time." And don't get me wrong, crossovers between the play and the art making would happen. I'd sometimes make a cool character I'd seen from a movie to play with my other action figures if the character wasn't sold commercially. All that mattered was that I had the coolest figures available to me to be able to drive these stories I'd weave when I was playing with them. And then the day came when playing with toys was kind of no longer a thing. But by the time it did, I'd amassed a collection of 3 4-foot-long bins of Star Wars action figures alone underneath my bed. Each of them a veteran of many stories, by now pretty much lost to the wind. But the drawing persisted. I grew more serious. I honed my craft. I followed my drive to create to Maine College of Art, where I found printmaking, namely linoleum carving. I fell in love with the bold quality of line I could achieve, and this allowed me to tie together my work aesthetically. My first carvings were portraits, basically cool characters. They were static images, but I wanted their faces to seem as though they lived through stories of their own. Little did I know, these characters were to become my new action figures in a whole new world of play I was about to stumble upon. And it was the process and reproducible nature of printmaking that allowed me to play with my drawings in new ways that I hadn't been able to before. So I carved this print with a window in it, designed specifically so that the bearded lady character I'd already carved could be printed behind the window looking in. And I did this by printing on a thin Japanese paper, printing the window on the front, and then printing the bearded lady carving on the back side so that you could see it through the paper. And I realized that the more portraits I carved, the more characters I could move through the story of this room. Kind of like if you have a dollhouse. You don't want just one doll to move the different rooms in the house or one item to fill in with. You want to be able to mix and match characters and create new situations. So I started carving these collections of items to fill my prints with. I'd print one collection and then meticulously cut out items as I needed them, collaging and claying them into my other prints I designed just for this purpose of mixing and matching to create variations on the same image. Much like this book here, where I designed it so that every time I printed it, I could fill the pages with different items. And so, where I once was a collector of the coolest action figures I could find, I now became a collector of the most interesting things I could think of in my mind or that I had seen in real life. So here, I'm probably drawing a really interesting leaf to be made into a carving later to build up prints with. And I realized that I could carve a collection of small carvings, use them to tell my new stories. So I set to carving this extensive bank of small prints because I realized I could save myself a lot of time by being able to stamp individual tiny prints directly onto my work rather than printing a block that had many images on it, cutting them out and collaging them into other works. And here you can see some of the various animal carvings that I have in the grouping on the left, each of which come in very handy in different situations. Like if I'm creating an image of a rundown house, I can build up a bunch of rats within it just by printing one small rat carving a bunch of times. And the grouping on the right here are all the prints that I used to build up the image right here. And this process is so much fun. It's very organic, and from just a few prints shown on that last side, I can create a multitude of visual assemblies that each tell different stories. And so this story right here is just one example of what you can make from a very small number of these prints. And I started to realize the parallels between this kind of playing I was doing as an artist and the kind of playing I was doing with it as a kid when I started making prints out of these small brick carvings I'd made. I grew to love my small brick prints because I can play with them just like Legos, stacking one on top of the other to make any structure I wanted, like this house here. And as fun as it was to have complete freedom to build an image with no guidelines, I realized if I created a simple context to build within, it could also be very interesting. So I set about to carving simple templates such as this one, that I could use as empty stages for the play to occur upon, until I would fill them with smaller prints. So that one's built up with some leaves, like you see me carving earlier. And here's another template. This one's an etching. Very simply serves as for me as a space to expand upon. When I look at this, I can think, what could be going on here? And it becomes a vehicle for me to build small stories on with my bank of pre-carved imagery. And here are just a few different iterations of this one stage. You can see you can do a lot with a very few prints. You'll see like the tree and the gravestones are repeated throughout, but I'm always carving because it's better to have more. A kid can have, the most creative kid can have so much fun with 2 action figures, but if he's got a whole heck of a lot more, he's gonna have a heck of a lot more fun. And by this time, I'm so excited by this process and how organized I've become, I sent my mom a photo of my bins of carvings, each in their own little categories. She sends me back the wake-up call that I needed, a photo of my bins of action figures back home in Connecticut, organized the same way, and I realized I was doing pretty much the same thing. The parallels were unignorable. I'd bring out my bins of carvings when it was time to work, just like I'd bring out my bins of action figures when it was time to play. I'd build them settings, reuse characters, even develop favorites. The one thing that was missing was my friends playing with me. So I did this. I asked my friend Ben over, opened my bins to him, told him to pick out a few carvings he liked and tell me a story with them, and I'd print it right there. And he told me the story of a hungry man whose only hope of eating was stealing a buffalo from this terrible monster from Eskimo folklore. And I would never, ever have made this print if I hadn't asked my friend Ben to come over and play with my prints with me.